Welcome back to the Brand Ambassador series. If you're not familiar with this space, you should. You will love the accent and the knowledge. Dave McNicoll.
Good to see you again, Frederick. Yeah, good to see you. Absolutely, no problem.
We're talking about one of those gems, I guess, from Scotland.
Yep.
Because it's not every day you've got a single malt Scotch from the Lowlands.
No, it's true.
Why, how, who?
I think there's a lot of history behind it as well. To me, there are four key elements as to why you have a distillery where it is. One is a good source of water. One is a good source of barley, so you need the barley crop, and historically it couldn't be brought in. You need good transport links, which is why, for example, all the distilleries in Ireland are down by the coast. Horse and cart's not much use to you there. And you need benevolent landlords, so people who would be all right with you building a distillery on their land. And the Highlands of Scotland, particularly around the banks of the River Spey and parts of Perthshire, are very good and have a lot of those elements together. In the Lowlands, a lot of the land ended up being given over to coal mining, city growth, manufacturing. The water became more tainted. It went down a different path. The Scottish Lowlands is where the bulk of the population is. So if Scotland has 5 million people, 3.5 million live in the Lowlands. Okay. So it doesn't have the same resources. And why today there's only now 5 distilleries in the Lowlands still producing. But again, it's all about the quality of the water and the location and so on. And those that were and did have that and have a history and a provenance of producing it, the whiskies they would make just because they come from the Lowlands doesn't make them less comparable to whiskies that come from the Highlands.
Right. So, but then, people tend to think Lowlands, easy, fruity, light. How true is that?
It is to a certain extent, because historically Lowland whiskies were not peated during the malting process. The water that they used tended to come over a different kind of geology. It tended to be like sandstones and so on. So it was more filtered through, which made it more mineral rich, and that tended to produce a whiskey that would be lighter on the palate and would, for whatever reason, work with the barley to generate a fruitier note. Right. And that is the remit. It's hard to say if that would have been necessarily the story over 150 years ago, when there may have been 2,000 distilleries in the Lowlands. So now that you're honey picking down to a certain small supply of them, you're really taking 5 distilleries, 2 of which are only just come online, the other 3 are more established. It's almost they are regions unto themselves. in my
well
estimation.
So then if you have to compare that to the other Lowlands,
the other Lowlander whiskies are light, but there's a degreeing variation within that, like you would have comparing any 2 whiskies. So it's rather than saying here's a particular region that has a particular type that's sort of like the typecast whiskey for that region, it's more like putting it in the crosshairs and saying, well, it's rich and light, or it's flowery but not smoky. There's different characteristics, and again, it's how you then use the wood. It's and how you use the distillation process. So whiskies in the Lowlands can be light, but you can work with them to make them more robust. And I think the Auchentoshan here, particularly the 3 wood, is a Lowland whiskey that is robust.
Oh, definitely.
But without it being that bonfire kind of robust.
But then if you go with say maybe a more distillery profile oriented whiskey, is that the 12-year-old that is the signature?
That I would say would be more the signature. The Auchentoshans, to me, it has 2 very unique characteristics in the story of the whiskey itself. The first of all is the water. Most Lowland whiskies, as I said, the water was always the problem, because it was being either used in manufacturing, or it was downstream of the manufacturing, or it was being used for domestic supply and this sort of thing. Well, Auchentoshan Distillery is very close to Glasgow. It's about 10 miles outside Glasgow, which is Scotland's biggest city. Nearly 2 million people. Very famous industrial city. Because it was a famous industrial city, it had in the 19th century all the same problems that most industrial cities had. Slums, cholera, diphtheria, all this stuff. And cholera was a problem. And so one of the greatest engineering projects of the 19th century was Loch Katrine, which is a lake in the Highlands, in the Southern Highlands. It was a natural loch that they dammed and made bigger. And in the 1840s, Queen Victoria pulled the switch, and from the Highlands came this beautiful, clean, fresh water all the way down 40 miles to Glasgow without any pumping required whatsoever. And that eradicated those diseases because you now had clean water. And Auchentoshan, although it sits outside the city, actually draws its water from Loch Katrine. So its water, although it's in the Lowlands, its water comes from the Highlands. Clean, fresh, and cold. Mm-hmm. The other thing that it does is in the distillation process, it triple distills. So it distills 3 times.
Let's get there.
Yeah, that's the nub of the.
But maybe I think we should get tasting.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the triple distillation is a very important key element.
It is
to Auchentoshan, but this 3 wood is extremely popular.
Yeah.
I feel like we should be tasting.
I think we should do this. We'll have a look at this bad boy. This is so. What I'll do is I will pour.
And I'll drink.
And you'll drink.
That's nice of you. Thank you. Very dark.
Well, what I'm going to do is, before I even do that, is we'll go. That's the colour, of course, is coming out of the wood element. So what I'm going to do is talk about a little bit about the distillation. There are other distilleries in Scotland which distill 3 times. It's actually a process that traditionally was used in Ireland when they were using pot stills. It was a triple distillation process. Scotland, no distillery except Auchentoshan uses 3 separate stills. So other distilleries will triple distill, but they'll use the spirit still twice. Auchentoshan has the intermediary still, so going through it 3 times. Most distilleries, when they produce the spirit that comes out of the still at the end of the process, it's in about the 70-71% alcohol mark. So in America, about 140 proof. Because it gets triple distilled, it comes in higher. So you get more of the higher alcohols. You get rarer alcohols which will form at that level. And it comes in at about 82%. So over 160 proof here in the US. So it has this higher level of different alcohols that will then play with the wood. And the wood takes that light spirit that is quite busy and got all these different strange flavours in it already, very strong in the perfume, even in the spirits from the still. You put it in the wood. Traditionally, Auchentoshan goes into bourbon wood, which gives you that lighter colour, which you know well and good. But when you compare it with the 3 wood, you will see it's much darker. Yeah.
Much darker.
There are 3 different barrels which are used in the process. The majority are still in the bourbon casks. But we then use 2 different types of sherry, Oloroso and sherry from Jimenez. And it's a combination of those 3 that bring completely different flavours, because that lively spirit, that busy spirit really wants to get into the wood. It has less to pull out of the bourbon than it can out of the sherry, and suddenly it infuses the 2 and you marry together a very different kind of whiskey. Now,
very different. I mean, this is, when you say Jimenez, I definitely get that nose of Pedro Jimenez sherry.
You're getting that in there, yeah.
Very clearly, it's rich, it's spicy, it's baked goods,
it's Christmas pudding. It's not Christmas pudding, Christmas cake. That's like it's that, yeah. You know, it's. But what I get in the background is a very similar, in terms of the alcohol in there, similar to the Irish whiskies. I find a little bit of that is then tempered with that sherry.
Because of the triple distillation?
I think because of the triple distillation. I think that brings it out. So, flange.
There's no punch though.
No.
It's rich, it's big, it's expansive.
And understated. It doesn't sit in your porch and wait for you to kick it out. It's there. To me, it has licorice.
It's licorice, it's sultana, it's
a little bit
resiny, of course.
Absolutely. And I feel citrus fruits, more like an orange zest in there towards the end.
Right.
It's up to you entirely what you get out of it. But a more complicated tasting whiskey For this, it would be hard to find for me.
But Dave, this is a meal.
It is, absolutely.
So if you want to have this along with a meal, what do you eat? It's already so much there in the glass.
I guess you would, I could see me, rather than sipping this along with my roast beefs and what have you, I could see me sitting afterwards with a nice cigar.
Right.
People think that when you're smoking a cigar, you ought to have a smoky whiskey, which is actually the last thing that you need to drink with it.
I mean, you're killing the cigar
Yeah.
and the whiskey as well.
Yeah. The wood is one of those expressions that says, look, we're going to do something different. We're going to play around with the wood. We've got this amazing triple distillation going on. Why not have triple wood? So I think it has a nice dovetailing saleability. Beyond that, there's 18 and there's 21 and 25, and it goes up the usual scale as a lot of the other ones do as well. But for within this, I think these two are ones that you will find in lots of bars. You'll find them in the shops, and they, as you say, they're proving very popular.
If you do like your single malt Scotch on ice,
I think with the seaweed you could probably do that.
All right.
I wouldn't be filling it with the ice, and certainly not small cubes, because the small cubes will melt quick.
Right.
I wouldn't go fully down the road of sticking one of those giant cubes in that you often get with the bourbons, but one or two big sized cubes, not a problem, or ice cold water to the same level, maybe half what you've got, so half and half.
Right.
But everybody should play around with it, you know.
If you find yourself by the distillery, can you go and visit?
You can. Actually, the very first time that I ever visited Auchentoshan Distillery, a number of years ago, it wasn't a visitor centre, and it was a trade visit only. And it was interesting in itself to see that process and how it all kind of, we were very much hard hats and this sort of thing. Now they have a wonderful brand new visitor centre, and it really is, cutting edge without being IMAX, razzmatazz, touchy-feely. A lot of distilleries have just gone overboard. Some of the distilleries are visitor centres with associated distilleries. This is still a distillery that has a nice visitor centre, great experience, they'll take you around, and if you're visiting the Glasgow area, there's a lot of cathedrals and art galleries and museums to go and visit, but why not go and visit a distillery as well? And it's on the road to Lowlands, which is just one of the most beautiful places in the world.
Yeah, very good.
So,
well, thank you very much.
No problem at all.
That was very nice. I think it's extremely important that people would pay attention to what comes out of the Lowlands, because
I agree.
It's not that whiskey for blenders like it used to be a long time ago anymore.
Yeah, and for anybody who's interested in the history of Scotch, anybody who's interested in the story of how an obscure drink from Scotland became a global phenomenon, actually the story of the Lowlands is actually one of the parts which often gets left behind. It is, yes, where a lot of the grain distilleries are. It's, yes, where a lot of the bottling plants are. And people tend to think of misty mountains and castles and then the distilleries down, and this sort of thing. But the Lowlands get overlooked, and yet they have a big, big part to play because that's where the people were. And at one point, nearly every town in the Lowlands had a distillery, and which was not true of the Highlands.
Well, for you visitors, don't miss this one.
Cheers.
We'll stick around and finish the bottle.
Absolutely. Thank you.